Along with his resignation, Justin Trudeau announced he will be proroguing Parliament until March 24th. Now, to help us understand what this means for the government and for the country, we have reached Errol Mendes. He's a professor of constitutional and international law at the University of Ottawa. Errol, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome, Deanna.
Errol, can you start by explaining for people what the proroguing of Parliament actually means? It's been a while since we've had this happen in Canada.
Well, proroguing means basically that there has been a decision by the Prime Minister to essentially have a reset of Parliament. I want to emphasize a reset of Parliament, not the government. The government is still in existence, with Trudeau being the Prime Minister until he's no longer the Prime Minister at the end of the leadership race. So proroguing basically means that in that period, until March the 24th, there will be a reset of everything that's going on in Parliament, which basically means, for example, that the 26 bills that were going through Parliament will actually be stopped. They'll be stopped in their tracks, essentially. Doesn't mean that some of them will never see the light of day, because a new government may actually ask on a unanimous motion to bring back some of them at the level at which they had gone through the process. But it basically means resetting all the activities in Parliament, not the government.
Tell me, thank you for clarifying and for distinguishing between those two, because that's really important. So how does this affect the day-to-day running of the government and the country? Because, you know, there are people who are waiting for checks that they're expecting to receive from the government. Really basic things like taxes, like, everything that is so dependent on the federal government, immigration for that matter, visas. This is all the stuff that federal government is responsible for. That should not be affected, correct?
Absolutely, and that is the reason why I want to emphasize that it is Parliament that is being reset, not the government. The government should continue. Now, we can talk about whether or not there's interactions between what the Parliament does and what public servants and ministers, cabinet ministers do. We can talk about that and how that may be affected, but no, in terms of overall, the government continues.
Errol, you mentioned some of the bills that are now kind of frozen in time, stalled, that may be picked up again or not, that may in fact be dead in their tracks. Some of them are things that have garnered a lot of chat in the past months. Some are quite controversial. Capital gains tax, some people love the idea of it, some people absolutely hate it. The Online Harms Act. Tell me, what is going to happen to this potential legislation?
Well, I'll leave the capital gains tax ones to the last because it's the most complex, which some experts are still debating what's going to happen to it. Let me go to the others, which are very significant to large parts of Canada's population, including the First Nations. There are, for example, bills which are going through in terms of extending the polling period for diverse groups apart from the center of Canada. They get more time to get their votes in. There's also a bill which dealing with fighting disinformation and interference with polling, for example, which will not go through now. There's one dealing with Aboriginal drinking water rights, for example, which will not go through. The one dealing with what's called the Lost Canadians, which there was an attempt to bring back the citizenship of those whose parents were abroad and had children in foreign countries. So there are many issues which will be set down for possible future bringing back. But right now they're stopped dead in their tracks. Dealing with the capital gains tax, that's a difficult one because the government decided to separate out one of the most important parts of the capital gains tax in terms of what's called the inclusion rate for businesses and individuals who get major revenues from over $250,000. Now, because that has been stopped in its tracks, there's a question whether or not the CRA can continue applying that because Parliament has not actually passed through it. That's going to be a contentious issue. And that's why there is going to be a link between what's happening or not happening in Parliament and what should be happening in the government, because somebody has to make a decision as to whether or not that will still be applicable to those who are caught by that rule.
Errol, while we still have you, I want to ask you, officially, not a lot of these people have officially announced their intention to run for Liberal leadership, but we do know that names that are likely to be seen there are Anita Anand, Melanie Joly. These ministers have really important portfolios. If they are indeed running for Liberal leaderships, how will they balance a leadership campaign where they will be asked what they think about, for example, Donald Trump's threats and taunts towards Canada, while still working on their existing portfolios? How does this work?
That's a really interesting question, and it raises the issue as to whether or not they should be allowed to continue being ministers and also going for the leadership of the party. Now, there have been, in the past, people who've done that. In fact, Jean Chrétien did that, actually, and was very successful, as you know. However, that being said, given the fact that we are now entering into probably the most dangerous time facing Canada, with a potential attack by the Trump administration, where he's now threatening, if you heard the latest speech that he gave, that he's threatening economic force now against Canada as a way of trying to get Canada to join the U.S., this is really serious. And it requires the absolute maximum attention of the cabinet, the leadership of the cabinet, plus the premiers. I think it's very important at this stage to have the very top leadership of the country, not just federally, but provincially too, to come together as a kind of a war room to actually act against whatever's going to happen after January the 20th, because there will be a significant attack on the economic present and future of Canada.
We do know that Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, has been calling for something like that in his appearances on American television. And we do know that there is the First Minister's meeting coming up around this time next week. So maybe something like that will come of that. Errol, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Errol Mendes is a professor of constitutional and international law at University of Ottawa.